Struggles with chronic neurological conditions like autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, anxiety, seizures, OCD, PANS or PANDAS, and so forth. Here are four things that are likely true for you as mom or dad. One is that you're exhausted. You've gone to all of the people like traditional pediatricians, medical specialists, medical system, and are left with little to no answers in finding the root cause, and you are worn out. Now, the next thing is you've probably been up late night searching and scrolling through websites, Facebook groups, Instagram accounts, etc., looking for hope and answers for your child. You've also probably already done all of the diet changes, the probiotics, the supplements, and the integrative therapy that's available. And yet, your child is still struggling. And lastly, it's not a diagnosis that you're looking for help with. You're looking for help decreasing the everyday struggle. And that is what we want to give you help with. We want to be able to make it just that much easier for you and for your kiddo to thrive and to succeed. So, if that sounds like you, your child likely has been stuck in what we call the perfect storm, and you as well. And so, what is the perfect storm? Well, the perfect storm is a sequence of traumatic, toxic, and life altering events that really every child goes through. But when we look at the perfect storm, we say to what degree, how early, and how often, and how much stress and tension or stressful events has a child been exposed to thus far. And that's really going to say the degree of some of these things that we're going to start to experience, or the amount of tension we expect to see in baby's body. So, you may have tried things like PT, OT, speech, and you're struggling to really make the progress you're looking for. And so you're looking to really look for that key to unlock that success. And because nothing really seems to get that job done. Well, this video is for you, and so we can dive into what is the perfect storm and how it may be affecting your kiddo. Well, what is the perfect storm? Well, we know that in the United States, 20% of United States children in the United States have special health care needs, and over 40% of school-aged kids have a chronic health condition. And so research knows that conditions like ADHD and autism have been steadily on the rise. And so, what is going on to potentially contribute to this? And so, really, we want to see how everything is linked together. And so, it's not saying it's just this one thing, but over time, we've increased the amount of stress in lots of different areas. And that is all linked together and creating essentially the perfect storm. So, for the first thing, is we're looking at kiddos that essentially it starts with something like colic and then they don't grow out of it. All of a sudden we start to see sensory processing disorder or sensory sensitivities, and so it really is this gradual. We've been told that, okay, well, they'll grow out of it, or oh, it's just a phase. But then we notice as they continue, it just becomes different issues and how it presents in the child's body. So it often starts with pregnancy. And that is something where we know that maternal cortisol actually crosses the placenta. And so, mom's maternal mental and emotional stress during pregnancy does play a role on baby stress. The second thing is, it really is if mom is in this fight or flight or high sympathetic nervous system state, those stress hormones are going to cross the placenta, they're going to be shared, but then it's also, we know that the umbilical cord is like the electrical power cord. And it really is, it's bringing things like nutrients and oxygen, but also connects the nervous system, mom's nervous system to baby's nervous system. And so when mom's stuck in that sympathetic or fight or flight or stress dominant state, baby also feels that. And so that's something that we're looking at from a sense that we know that stress overall is the highest it's ever been. And it's no denial with the effects of cortisol or chronic stress can have on our bodies. But then we also add in different things like birth or high risk pregnancies or different things where we've over medicalized pregnancy and it's creating even more stress for mom. And then, especially in the perinatal period. But then going into the next thing is then going to be going into birthing process, so actual birth. So it starts with the mental and emotional stress and potentially a high risk pregnancy, other factors contributing. And now we have a potentially it went from we're watching mom, baby is, quote, too big. And now we've decided to induce mom, and mom wasn't quite ready, but we're inducing mom. And now all of a sudden we're in a hospital setting. We've induced her. Now didn't want to do an epidural, but now because contractions are so much more intense that we've induced with Pitocin, now she gets an epidural. And now potentially her birthing plan was to switch positions, to be able to move, maybe even do a water birth, but we've done an epidural. And so now that's limited in her options and labor starts to stall, etc. And then all of a sudden it becomes an emergency C-section. And the idea is that the medical system is designed to keep us alive. And so there are lots of instances where we are very grateful to be able to have interventions, but we know that it's actually a small number of C-sections that are really medically necessary. And so we actually have a lot of contributing effects to increasing our C-section rate. And in some hospitals, that C-section rate is upwards of 35%. And so not that C-sections are inherently bad, but where are we going wrong when we're getting to almost to, a 60-40 split on C-sections? And so what are we saying, or how are we not supporting mom in really allowing the body to do what the body is truthfully designed to do? And so then, not that the C-section is inherently bad, but because of a more intense delivery process and more intense contractions, etc., we've turned into a C-section, and that is contributing to stress on baby's body. Even physically, when baby is pulled out by the head and the neck, there's a lot of strain on baby's head and neck that they don't experience through a traditional vaginal delivery. And so there's more strain in a C-section on baby's head and neck. So now we're really looking at how they're yanking and twisting baby's head and neck. And we're looking at tension in the upper neck and in the cervical spine or the neck. And so what this is contributing to misalignments, tension, and even alterations in that neuromuscular function in a brand new infant, or what we call subluxation. And so if you can imagine, with the amount of force, we then have misalignments, and that's going to create this pattern of subluxation. And one of the number one indicators is that infant torticollis is when an infant favors one side or a lack of range of motion in their neck, and potentially even like flattening on one side because of that lack of range of motion. It's an indicator that there's a lot of tension in their neck, and there may be misalignments or subluxations going on. Some of the other things that really may start popping up, because we know that that's also where the brainstem exits, and also one of our cranial nerves, which is our vagus nerve, which helps our body calm down. And so when we get in this subluxation state, it's going to put our body into stress, and therefore now we start that cycle of fight or flight or sympathetic dominance. And that can start to pop up in ways of potentially they're not resting or sleeping and soothing well, or potentially there's issues with lats or swallowing or eating or digestion, potentially with, maybe immune function or lots of congestion or mucus, etc. And so those are signs that our body is stuck on this stress response. And that can be linked to the fact that we have misalignments that have shifted or a more traumatic birthing process that's shifted baby already into the stress response. So now in this perfect storm, it's not just a traumatic birth experience, and it's not just mom's mental and emotional stress, maternal mental and emotional stress. It's not just these things. It's not just then our other category is toxins or environmental stressors. And so that's diet or medications, etc., which, one of the most common things in kids is ear infections. And then they get an ear infection and then they end up on antibiotics. And not that antibiotics are inherently bad, but then they start getting chronic ear infections. They're on multiple antibiotics. And now we are killing good bacteria and bad bacteria in the gut. And that's when we start to see these chronic immune challenges because our immune system is we're stuck on stress, so our immune system is immunocompromised, and then we're also damaging our gut health and therefore suppressing the immune system as well. So that's the environmental stress. And so I have this little handout, and one of these days I'm going to be technologically savvy enough that I could put this like actually on the screen. But it's traumas, which is birth interventions, toxins, which is environmental stressors, and then thoughts, which is mental and emotional. And essentially, and then like early warning conditions and then chronic conditions. And so really what it is it's not one of these things. It's not any one of these things. It's the fact that we've increased all of these things, and that's creating this perfect storm in essentially where we're ending up. And so when people say, oh, it's just diet, or oh, it's just mental and emotional stress, or oh, it's just the birthing process, it's not just one of those things. It's the fact that we've increased stress in all of these areas, and we're seeing the impacts of all of these things. And that really adds up to a colicky, fussy baby, or a toddler with chronic ear infections, or sensory sensitivities, or a school-aged kiddo that they're starting to start talking about ADHD or behavioral issues. So that's when it starts to say, okay, what is really contributing? And it's really this multifaceted look on how everything across the board has increased, and we've landed ourselves in a situation that we've landed ourselves in. But ultimately, even though all of these things have increased and that across the board, ultimately, the answer to all of it is getting out of stress or dealing with the stress. And from a chiropractic perspective, that's the subluxation or the misalignments, especially those that are early in the birthing process. And so, if we can come in with a chiropractic adjustment and help decrease tension, put things into proper alignment, but then also stimulate the vagus nerve, also stimulate the prefrontal cortex to the brain to help shut down the stress response. And so we're coming in and we're addressing the stress. And when we can address the stress, everything else we see improvements in because it all originates from the problem is too much stress. And that stress is different. The stress isn't just one stressor. And so it's not one particular stressor like on here. It's not just one of these stressors. It's all of these stressors have increased, and therefore we're creating this. But it all comes back to if we can deal with how the body is handling stress, because all of those things trigger the body's stress response, which is our sympathetic fight or flight. And if we can help with that, then essentially we can decrease the impacts of all of the other stressors in our environment. And so it's twofold. It's important that we're dealing with our stress, we're managing our stress, but then it's also important we look and see where do we have stress and how can we control the amount of stress. But if our stress is outpacing the amount of support we're giving our body, that's when we start to see the tip of the iceberg or symptoms. And so if you're starting to see symptoms in your child, especially your newborn or your baby, and it's that early on, if you're starting to see symptoms, symptoms are the tip of the iceberg. And so that means underneath the iceberg, there is a pattern of stress or sympathetic dominance. And if we can come in and we can help with that and decrease that and trigger that parasympathetic, that rest and digest, we can really set your kiddo up for so much more success in hitting those milestones, growth and development, etc. And so go ahead, bring your kiddo in to Sunlife Chiropractic or a neurologically focused chiropractic office near you. We can get your kiddo scanned. We have cutting edge technology to look and see where there's inflammation, tension, and how balanced their stress response is so that we can be able to support your kiddo. But if you're wondering, why have I tried this diet? Why have I tried this detox? Why have I tried this? But it's just not getting me where I want to get. It's because we're only looking at a piece of the puzzle. And all of those things are valid and they're good and they really are, they do contribute and it's good to have whole foods. It's good to move our bodies regularly, etc. But if it's still coming up short, the missing component or the missing piece to the puzzle may be addressing the stress response. So bring your kiddo in and let's be able to help your kiddo out and get them out of the storm.